When I was in college, I had 3 things at my disposal: a lot of dorm friends, a PS3, and a TV. I had a 360 and Wii and everything, but I just got really into Sony exclusives back in the day. I was the dude who always hung out in my dorm with the door cracked so friends on my floor could just drop by and hang out whenever. And seeing as most of them knew about Jackbox and Call of Duty and little else, it always gave me a sense of satisfaction to say to people, here are some old games that many people consider masterpieces. Here's a game where you use a remote control wand to perform open heart surgery on civilians. Here's a game for if you just want to get fucked up for a while. Like, I was just exposing anyone and everyone to the fact that this incredibly limited world of games they enjoy isn't entirely representative of the other great titles out there. Enter That Game Company. No, I mean, that's literally their name. An interesting little indie dev team led by Genova Chen and co-founder Kelly Santiago, who decided they wanted to make games a little more peaceful, less murder and more flower sniffing. Chen attended the University of Southern California where he met composer Austin Wintory, who would help him score a few games. They made titles that left a noticeable ripple in the gaming community, like Flow and Flower. One game about diving deeper into an endless aquatic abyss with abstract foes attempting to eat you before you eat them, and another about restoring the polluted world through the healing energy of nature. They didn't really catch on in a major way until the release of their third game, Journey, which made That Game Company a household name. Have you heard of That Game Company? What? No? They made Journey. Oh yeah, them. Aesthetically minimalistic. Journey features a red-robed traveler navigating an endless shimmering golden desert, which alone would have sufficed as an exorbitant, picturesque tapestry, but they managed to turn an entire game out of the experience of moving from point A to Z, thanks entirely to the sweeping orchestral score and minimalistic visuals, as well as the PS3's then revolutionary HD graphics, using little other than your scarf's length and glow to determine your maximum flight stamina and current charge, as well as the glowing destination of a purportedly nearby mountain peak. The game effectively communicated, here's where you're going, and here's your sole tool used to get there. Gameplay-wise, you either walk, slide down steep sand cliffs, or fly, and touching other players, ribbon creatures, or general sources of heat will restore your flight stamina. Through interacting with the world around you and discovering cryptic murals, the player will come to understand a vague war, terrible weapons of destruction and hatred, and a prophecy that involves the player themselves. But all of this is fairly stock, if not for the amazing soundtrack composed by the ambitious Austin Wintory, made strikingly memorable thanks to the beautifully mastered Sony budget-level orchestra he utilized to create an intensely spiritually rousing series of textured tracks, making heavy usage of plucked strings, sustained string notes, melodically ascending arpeggios, staccato wind notes, and so many other genius details to the extent that, despite being an editor known for the specific dissection of instruments and musical techniques, I'm not going to touch it out of respect for the game's respective composers who clearly put an almost religious level of love into their tracks that I feel more comfortable saying, go get some nice headphones, take an edible, and play the game, because you'll get a much deeper sense of appreciation than if I simply point out, this song uses a string quartet, holy fuck. Journey is without a doubt one of the most genre-defying video game adventures of the modern age, but for the most part, it doesn't do anything that revolutionary. The storyline is a literal one-to-one implementation of the typical hero's journey storyline template, in which the character has a call to adventure, some supernatural aid guiding him in his quest, challenges and struggles from the known into the unknown, allies providing assistance along the way, and eventually experiencing death and rebirth. It's perfectly fine, but it's the same storytelling template used by Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Spider-Man, you name it. That's not to say it's bad, just that it's commonplace. And when the main aspect of your game that carries the events along is fairly bog standard, and your protagonist has no identity or home from which they set off, you'll want to make up for it visually and auditorily, and holy shit did they. But as a company, you can't be expected to coast off of the success of one game forever. Enter Sky, which came out for iOS in 2018. It was pretty unique and seemed promising, but it was a phone game, so I didn't care. Mobile game controls are commonly shit, since anyone that's tried to play like Street Fighter 4 back when mobile games first came out can all tell you the controls are imprecise as fuck because there's no tactile feedback when you're hitting a dead zone or activating a button, which is why they've since allowed players to hook up external Bluetooth controllers or buy controller add-ons. When you play the game normally, you use touch controls like you would most other mobile games, but moving the camera is very clunky and weird, and sometimes it feels like pressing and holding icons to jump or fly don't always react responsively. But when you need to type, you have an on-screen keyboard and can also use voice dictation, versus the Switch where you have to use an external keyboard or slowly type out each letter. But otherwise, it's a 3D platformer with scripted segments, light puzzle solving, and cooperative play. Because I'm allergic to touch controls, I logged into Sky, got into the second area, and then stopped playing because of the game's lack of clarity on what to do next. Something about constellations and flight stamina, but it wasn't very optimized and made my phone really hot, so I stopped playing. I heard they'd be bringing it to other consoles, so I opted to wait to try it there instead. Enter July of 2021, and Sky came to the Nintendo Switch as a free-to-play title, just as it was on Android and iOS. I played it for a little bit and really enjoyed what I was experiencing before I realized that the Switch's hardware is really old and struggles to maintain an appropriate frame rate. Before I started playing on mobile and found an incredibly useful peripheral called the Backbone One, which is basically an official Microsoft product that feels like an Xbox One controller for your phone. There's also the Razer Kishi that costs the same but is compatible with Lightning and USB-C connections that works well too. Also, as a side note, I recorded for a while on my Switch and iPhone interchangeably because the iPhone has more processing power than the Switch. So if you notice the aspect ratio or anything else is different, don't worry, you're not hallucinating. You're a little sky child and you're trying to pursue this light at the top of a distant mountain, which is, of course, familiar. You can increase your maximum stamina by interacting with these glimmering sky children, which give you winged light, and the more stamina you get, the more flaps you'll have. If you meet other gray sky kids, you can touch candles together to meet them, and should you offer candles to become friends with them, you'll be able to hold hands with them and interact in a number of cute and funny ways. You can also pay 3 candles to send someone a heart, which are very rare items that are only made available from other players gifting them to you, and can be used to purchase rare cosmetics and upgraded cloaks or rare masks. But if you aren't a whale and still want to send gifts to friends, you can send what are called partial hearts, which are fractions of a heart that accumulate collectively from everyone on your friends list once per day. Holding down the call button will allow you to make shouts, which mainly serves to give a boost of stamina to other travelers in range. It's this same button used to call out that can be tapped lightly and quickly to simulate chatter, making it fairly clear when another player is nudging you to follow them, trying to get your attention or cheer you on. Even though there's no way to communicate complex messages to others, it's effective enough to get you through your short pilgrimage, and endeared many newcomers to the game's simplistic, goal-oriented social design, which also doubled as a positive space compared to those found on Xbox Live. This is where That Game Company decided to allow for communication in the form of text conversation, where conversations being relegated to social areas and hubs and off the beaten path out in the world. But if you upgrade your friendship enough, you gain an open line of communication to the player, sort of like how Toontown friend codes worked. The music in Sky, all of which was composed by Vincent Diamante of Flower fame, is all pretty minimalistic, with lone or multiple instruments carrying the simplistic, oftentimes slow-paced melodic tracks, or a big explosion of multiple ones to denote celebration or action. As mentioned earlier, I normally go into music discussion on my channel out of habit and dorky fixation, but I'll keep it pretty brief, as I'd like to encourage people to play this game for themselves, and seeing as it's such a short experience, I think it's better to play it for yourself and enjoy the music, preferably with headphones or earbuds. But don't waste your time with Skull Candy or Turtle Beach. Save up and get like actual big boy headphones, as I promise this and many other auditorily oriented games are worth it. Seriously, you won't be able to go back. A lot of the tracks carry this great whimsy and use piano, as well as a lot of wind instruments, primarily the oboe and flute, and often include strings like guitar, violin, cello, and harp to carry the lightweight, emotionally resonant experience of soaring freely in an endless ocean of clouds. I can't really articulate it much more than that, but Diamante used silence generously in a lot of his tracks, and it gave the entire OST a feather-light atmosphere that I'll never get sick of. In terms of the gameplay loop, as you've been seeing from the footage so far, you mainly do some platforming and easy puzzle solving, and at the end of every level, you watch a cutscene with an elder before moving on to the next area. There are 6 areas total, with a final boss of sorts called the Eye of Eden, which gets you currency called Ascended Light, depending on how many winged light you got so far, that you can use to unlock more cosmetics or increase your relationship with friends to unlock various benefits. This is effectively the gameplay loop. You absorb these red flame orbs near red candles, which reset every day at 2 a.m. Central Time. You go around and increase your wingspan by collecting winged light, and then every Sunday morning the game resets and you go to the Eye of Eden with a friend or two, complete the game, watch the end credits, receive your Ascended Light, use it to buy cosmetics, rinse, and repeat. If this sounds boring, It kind of is. It's not meant to replace your team-based shooter or ubiquitous third-person action game, but instead take the formula that made Journey work, play through a beautifully captivating platformer adventure game, watch the ending, start a new game, and repeat, hopefully trying to make new friends in the process, and monetize that and make it into a more socially capable experience that people can enjoy, regardless of their experience level, with speedrunners probably enjoying the extra challenge that comes from picking up every candle in the game as fast as possible. In fact, if you go back and play Journey after playing Sky, you realize how much less fun Journey is in comparison. Don't get me wrong, I love Journey and always will, but it honestly feels like Sky just does so many small things better. In Journey, the camera feels a bit sluggish, and the Guardian or War Machine enemies are much more unforgiving compared to the Dark Dragons in Sky, with one punishing you with a permanent reduction when attacked and not being able to mitigate said attack once it starts, and the other letting you hide and otherwise not get totally fucked on accident. Journey has a fitting cosmetic system with a robe that gets a higher embroidery with each subsequent completion of the game, as well as a white robe with a self-sustaining stamina regen for people who can find every glyph in the game and thus showing mastery, while Sky has a much more robust cosmetic system, with individual parts being equipable on the body, neck, face, hair, sides, as well as your back prop and most importantly, your cape. And movement options just feel better too. In Journey, once you're entirely out of stamina, you just have to walk slowly and auto-jump up inclines, being reasonably inconvenienced as a result of wasting your energy. But in Sky, you have a ton of heat sources available to you, including the clouds at the edges of most areas, and your mid-air trajectory comes with options too. You can fly in the default closed wing mode, which prioritizes height over forward trajectory, or you can fly in open wing mode by pressing the right bumper, which lets you move forward with each boost of energy and maintain more airtime. You can also do cool flips and stuff that can distinguish you as an advanced player, if you're one of those MMO tryhards that needs to greet everyone by showing off every mount you've collected in the last 6 years of your life. The first level, Isle of Dawn, serves as a peaceful little introduction to the world and its inhabitants, as the player meets the first of many spirits and begins to learn how the candle and heart currencies work. It's here you'll realize the game has no map or means of easily plotting out locations and hidden content, so any maps you find online are either drawn or taken from out-of-bounds bird's eye view, which I think adds to the sense of mystique. Its main purpose is to funnel the player toward the next area, where they can be taken by the charm of the daylight prairie, which is symbolic of the exuberance of adolescence, with multiple branching paths all hiding their own secrets and trials. After that comes the hidden forest, which the player will immediately realize has perpetual rain which saps their stamina, introducing the premise that your teenage years are tumultuous and intimidating, where loneliness seems most detrimental to your well-being, and pairing up with others seems almost mandatory to get by. Next comes the Valley of Triumph, announced after transitioning out of a cloudy tunnel before being launched to the surface, where it always manages to load in just a little late every single time, which has 2 different competitive events that players can playfully challenge each other over. And given the more aggressive nature of the level design and musical orchestration, is an allegory for being in the prime of your life, where you're pursuing lofty goals and competing with others to fulfill your dreams, only to be immediately curtailed by the drastic segue into the Golden Wasteland, announced by a vast squall that seems to consume the world, before jumping off of a nearby landing and getting enveloped by the cyclone below. This area introduces the Dark Dragons, and much like in Journey, they make their entrance by attacking a lost manta to demonstrate lethality. But unlike in Journey, where they see you and you just have to wait until they annihilate your scarf before you continue, they look significantly more imposing, while also giving you a generous 5-second window to hide before they'll transition to sentry mode, only taking 1 to 6 winged light and turning the player dark. It's also where you'll probably begin to see the boneyards and hazardous black sludge water and dark crab enemies, and realize that the deficit of nearby heat sources around the starting area was an intentional design choice. And it's at this point that you may have sensed this pattern and surmised that the Golden Wasteland is a metaphor for a major downfall, such as adverse health and old age catching up to you. Absolutely evidenced by the Guardian Spirit being a battle-worn hero. But after you make your way through the Wasteland, you'll eventually stumble upon an ancient library called the Vault of Knowledge, utilizing quiet, contemplative music as you ascend higher and higher through a seemingly endless night sky. This is, of course, the transition into your elderly years and the eventual acceptance one finds as they mentally prepare for their death. and the final area is the Eye of Eden. This is effectively a final gauntlet, as the player will be forced to dodge red meteors which swiftly drain their stamina upon contact, dodge dark dragons that survey the area, and figure out these safe spots to stand. Once the player survives this section and proceeds to the final area, they have to navigate through a cold, rocky field, lighting up torches for any players along the way, giving up their winged light bit by bit until they eventually perish and reincarnate, at which point you'll be treated to the most visually spectacular ending I think I've ever seen in a game, which is per usual essentially just a flashier reimagining of Journey's finale with a greater emphasis on the afterlife and passing on the social torch. It's difficult to make a fitting conclusion to this video, considering the unique state of flux that Sky seems to experience. It's both a traditional video game that capitalizes on and improves a lot of Journey's mechanics, while also existing in a mobile gaming ecosystem with microtransactions and cosmetic purposes. And as a result, we get a live service mobile video game that introduces new content and recycles older content for fresh players. So it's kind of hard to end my review by just saying go check it out if it looks interesting. But as it currently stands, that's kind of all that's left to say about it. It's not some masterful work of art. It doesn't have a great story. The moment-to-moment gameplay isn't deep or thrilling. The music isn't quite on the god-tier level that Journey's was. The graphics are nothing to write home about, except for those fucking clouds. And as you can tell from the footage you're seeing on screen, it's not very flashy or attention-grabbing, but it's the only game to do what it does with the budget and level of polish that it has at its disposal. And it has such a distinct identity as a result of that. People who play this game every moment of every day are understandably going to get burned out, which has led to some somewhat forced drama perpetuated by the community, worsened by That Game Company's merchandise store selling out immediately and not restocking for like a fucking year, and people having too high of expectations regarding how wholesome the player base ought to be, and the unfortunately cynical reality of people's callous indifference and overall growing antisocial trends is made all the more apparent in the switch from a two-player game with no actual communication to a much broader social game where people can be overbearing and players reluctantly spend money to avoid the potential fear of missing out in a mobile game that capitalizes on the veneer of benevolence and selflessness to make long-term profits. As Genova originally intended, he made a game that entire families can enjoy together for free, that romantic partners can play in order to unwind after a long, stressful day, that is entirely playable by yourself and has a community that you can presumably get involved with and make friends with. But it fills this niche where I can come home depressed, not having the energy to hop on some shooter and get screamed at, and just listen to the pleasant flute melodies while I collect the little candle fireballs. It's not meant to be a fully fleshed out, constantly evolving game, but an occasional little 3D puzzle platformer trip down memory lane when you're in the mood for it. And he took into account human psychology, how to mitigate griefing, how to incentivize players to give hearts to others without it feeling cheap or unearned, and incorporated all of it without the player ever knowing, which I suppose is the ultimate goal of good game design. And I think it's pretty neat to have an entertainment medium where, whether you want to physically assault fictional enemies and blow off some steam, cultivate virtual plants in exchange for virtual money to grow your virtual farm, or just enjoy a pleasantly picturesque setting, you can do it. But Sky will always fill that niche for me, in which I get to Mario 64 wing cap my way around the world and hug people while collecting colorful capes. And that's pretty alright. Now if you'll excuse me, I have some dying to do. That's a terrible outro.